Hi, everybody. We're just waiting for people to find their way in from the waiting room. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first session of the Festival of Trusteeship of day 4, just 2 days to go. Today, we're talking about fundraising faux pas, things trustees have done to muck up getting money. And I think it's going to be a really juicy, interesting and educational session as well for those of us that aren't fundraisers but are trustees. As you've seen, the session is being recorded. If you've booked onto this session separately, you will get access to the recording afterwards. If you're a weekly pass holder, you'll get all of the recordings at the end of the week. You've been muted as you've come into the call. Please stay on mute unless Carol comes to you for a question. That just helps keep everything nice and clear in terms of sound. We've enabled closed captions at our end, so if you want the subtitles, you need to click your CC or closed caption button on your device. Please absolutely feel free to use the chat to ask questions, to share reflections. Please keep comments respectful. Equally, if you find the chat very distracting, as some people do, feel free to completely ignore it. Carol or I will always repeat a question that's going to the panel so that you don't need to be looking at the chat. And if you want to go over the panel later, for example, for useful resources that might be shared there, it is included on the recording. We are holding a networking session tonight. It's our final one. It's at 7:30. We'll include the link, the Zoom link to that in the chat. If this session and other sessions that you're attending make you think, actually, I just want to get in a room and have a chat with some fellow trustees, please do come along to our networking session. A thank you to our media partner, Third Sector, who've helped us shout about the festival. And then a really huge thank you to Ecclesiastical. It's thanks to them that the festival is free or low cost. The maximum that people are paying is £5 a session, and that's all thanks to Ecclesiastical support. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Carol, who's chairing this session.
Thank you, Penny. Hi, everyone, and welcome to what I hope will be an insightful panel discussion as part of the Festival of Trusteeship during Trustees Week. So my name is Amiki Carol Akiumi, and I'm a social entrepreneur and the founder of Money for You, an organization committed to using financial education and entrepreneurship interventions to eradicate economic inequalities for people and organizations from underrepresented communities. As someone who served on the board of, different organizations, nonprofit organizations as a trustee, I'm especially thrilled to have you join us today for a compelling conversation that'll delve into a critical aspect of the nonprofit world, and that's fundraising. But our session is titled Fundraising Faux Pas, the things trustees do to mess up getting money. And this aims to shed light on some common pitfalls, to share experiences, and provide valuable insights to help trustees become more effective stewards of their organization's financial well-being. In this ever-evolving landscape of philanthropy and fundraising, trustees play a pivotal role in guiding their organizations toward financial sustainability. Their decisions, actions, and strategies can significantly impact the success or failure of fundraising efforts. And today, I'm really honored to be joined by a very distinguished panel of women who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field of fundraising and governance. Our panelists today represent a diverse range of perspectives, and they have witnessed the full spectrum of fundraising experiences. From missteps to triumphs, they have valuable insights to share. And as we explore the topic of fundraising faux pas, we'll uncover the challenges that you trustees might encounter, explore some strategies to overcome them, and ultimately our aim is to equip trustees like yourselves to navigate the fundraising landscape more effectively. Now, let's introduce our panelists and dive into the key questions that we'll be addressing in today's discussion. In alphabetical order, and thankfully, just the way they appear on my screen, I'll go first to Alison Cohen. Alison moved from the commercial world to the charity sector 20 years ago, and she specializes in marketing, digital, and fundraising leadership and change. Alison worked at Asthma and Lung UK, Barnardo's, Battersea, Comic Relief, Great Ormond Street Hospital, Marie Curie, MenCap, Scope, and Teenage Cancer Trust. She's now currently the vice chair at the New Economics Foundation, also a Samaritans Finance Committee member. But previously, she was vice chair at Mind and chair of their policy committee. Welcome, Alison.
Hello, everybody. Really lovely to be here. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Next, I'll go to Emma. Emma Lowe has had 30 years of charity sector service. Employed primarily in fundraising, communications, and project management roles, Emma's experience covers health, social welfare, and disability sectors, the field of women's rights and international aid, and is also corporate social responsibility. Emma is a strategic decision maker. She's an effective leader, a trainer, and mentor. She's got a strong track record of raising money to achieve social impact. As an experienced trustee, Emma is currently on the board of a small national eye care and homelessness charity, Vision Care for Homeless People, as well as a local youth charity in Buckinghamshire called Youth Concern. Emma is also one half of the fundraising consultancy Nova Fundraising and Associates, who specialize in growing the fundraising skills and capacity of small but mighty charities. Welcome, Emma.
Thanks for having me today. Good to see you all.
Excellent. And Kemi Olafore is a qualified management accountant, having worked in the not-for-profit sector for nearly 20 years, with finance roles in the university, charity, and international development fields. This has included being part of teams securing large-scale funding. Alongside this, she's undertaking various voluntary roles, including a trustee for a charity providing counseling to young people and an advisor for a social enterprise, creating workshops for women to learn DIY skills. Kemi is currently a senior finance business partner at a health innovation organization, and she volunteers for the Huntington's Disease Association. Welcome, Kemi.
Thank you, Carol, and well, hi, everybody. Great to see you all.
Excellent. Laura Edgerton is the head of internal communications and employer branding at Goodbody, an Irish financial services firm. In her role, Laura manages charity partnerships and spending, employee programming, and the charity's business marketing channel. Laura has over 15 years of management experience in communications, marketing, and branding, working with large multinationals, domestic firms, and as a consultant for charities. She's a passionate champion of diversity and inclusion, the arts, and Irish food. Laura serves as a trustee on an arts board in her adopted hometown of Cork, Ireland, and is a longtime judge for the Irish Food Awards. Last but by no means least, welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Happy to be here today.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to dive into our questions today. And first of all, I'd really like to call on Laura, to tell us, to share an example of a fundraising failure or faux pas and the lessons that she's learned from it.
Yeah, so I'm happy. Obviously, I'm talking from the corporate perspective. I would say that I generally get about 40, probably take about 40 to 50 pitch meetings a year. I try and keep them to a half hour with charities, not-for-profits, and I try and keep them in line with the sectors that we cover, which is like culture, heritage, the arts, social programs, environmental issues, and health research. So you'd have to kind of fall into those kind of areas before we take a call. But generally speaking, the biggest faux pas that I commonly get would be disorganization. And that's something I think as board members that we all have a hand in being able to help, right? So that's not having the person who's doing the corporate pitches have a proper pitch deck or have a story or talk about those corporate synergies that kind of sync things up. So whether that's a sustainability initiative that you have going on or a diversity and inclusion initiative that may work well with their company. You'd be shocked at the number of emails I've got with the wrong company name on them, things like that. Little things, big things. I often get first-time requests to speak with somebody for over an hour, and working with charities or picking charities is like 1/6 or 1/7 of my job. So I can't spend a half hour. Now, if we become partners, I'll spend plenty of time with you and we'll foster the relationship. But that's definitely a struggle in terms of just time constraints on us. And then I also think sometimes it's not positioning the benefits. I think when you're thinking about it as a trustee reviewing a pitch deck or what the experience is for employees at the organization going to corporates, they really need to think about what synergies are going to kind of link the two, what makes sense for the corporate experience. Now, are they looking for branding? Are they looking to get more exposure with diversity and inclusion programs, sustainability programs? Are they looking to attract Gen Z or Gen Y to their business through interests and through these programs as well? So there's that hiring attraction, there's the branding attraction, there's the does this make sense for our company? And then just also making sure that the people who are going into these corporate meetings understand the company and are prepped ahead of time. Now, it's not an extensive research project, right? But sometimes I have people that just don't know what we do. They just say financial company and they must have money. Now, we have 400 people. We don't have a huge budget. So we try and be very strategic with it and make sure we're working with great charities and not-for-profits that work with who we are as a firm. But there's just a lot of things sometimes that just are not fully lined up when you go into those meetings. And as trustees, we can help really get that down pat before people are going into those meetings and representing the firm or the company.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laura. Alison, I want to come to you because you joined the charity sector 2 decades ago. So in some cases, you know, for some people, you'll be a veteran. And the good thing about that, I think, is that you've actually worked in charities and also sat on the board. So do you have any examples that you'd like to share? A couple of examples very quickly, but also more importantly, what you've learned from that, you know, straddling both sides of the, you know, being on the board and also being a member of operations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would just for context say that, you know, a number of the charities I've worked for, as you noted at the beginning, Carol, are quite large, well-funded organisations with big fundraising teams. And I appreciate that that's not the case for many of us around the table today. I can give you quite a juicy example to start off with, where we had a charity that shall remain nameless, an event with quite a few high-profile people, and one of them was a pop star who clearly had a large amount of money, but also a large amount of influence and in terms of their networks. And having brought everybody in the room together, one of the people whose job was to build relationships and get some money out of these people, or at least access to their networks, literally pinned this pop star against a wall using their arm, sort of had them in a corner, and then found that once they'd done that, they didn't actually know how to make the ask or how to build that rapport. So they kind of did the physical things, but they hadn't really prepared. And so it was a really tricky situation where I then had to move that person along, even though they were incredibly important to the charity and very sort of senior. But yeah, it was a kind of practical example that always sticks in my mind. I think the other thing that happens really for very good reasons is that well-meaning board members decide to do some kind of sponsored or challenge event to raise money for the charity. So sponsored bike rides or other kind of events like that. And what they don't realise is that actually that takes quite a lot of support from the fundraising team to make that happen, from social media team. They have, you know, high expectations of what will be delivered to support them, and then they go out to their networks and ask for money and get a very small amount of money, you know, so say a couple of £100, and then everybody's disappointed. It's used up a lot of time, a lot of energy, and everybody ends up being quite demoralized and disappointed. And then what happens is that person feels that they've done their fundraising bit because they did this event, and then they close off from fundraising and they don't do anything else. And in fact, what they could do is be using their networks in a much more strategic way. So two sort of basic examples. I have lots, but not all for today.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm really pleased that, you know, people who are listening are just as astounded as I am. And in fact, I do like Laura's top tip: don't resort to physical violence, you know, and do not scare off your donors, I would add. It's because that's quite intimidating, isn't it? So we will really explore innovative and creative strategies a little bit further down the line. But now I want to kind of pivot and you know, start thinking about some of the more common misconceptions about fundraising that trustees should be aware of. And Emma, I'd like to come to you really, because you run Nova Fundraising and Associates. You specialize in growing fundraising skills and capacity of small but mighty charities, who I'm sure are well represented here. How do you think we could avoid? So talk about some of the common misconceptions about fundraising and help trustees to begin to think about how we could avoid those.
Thanks, Carol. So just a warning you all, Carol's got an open brief to shut me up because she knows that I could probably talk all afternoon on this topic. So I'm going to talk fast and give you a whole bunch of bullet points I've got scratched down here. Number one, just because you employ a fundraiser, if you do have the benefit of employing a fundraiser, if it isn't you as a trustee that's actually doing the fundraising, don't assume the money will come in because you've got a fundraiser or three. It won't. Also, don't just put your fundraiser in a corner and say, see you in a year, let me know when you've raised 100K, 500,000, 1 million. It doesn't work like that. It's a team sport. See me later if you want to talk about how it becomes a team sport. It's vital that you're all in it together. We're working with a lovely charity at the moment, actually, and I've interviewed all the staff, all the trustees, and everyone wants to work together. Perfect platform for fundraising. So don't leave your fundraiser in the corner. I hope you've all seen the Dirty Dancing film with the melons, but you know, definitely don't leave them alone to do it. It's a long game. There ain't such thing as a quick win, in my opinion, as fundraising, because even if you get a quick win, it's about what you're going to do with it next. It's about the long game. This is not a cash point situation where you rock up to the cash point once a year, submit your awards for all application and disappear. Yeah, okay, you might get away with that with awards for all because if you don't get chosen to do a report, but that's about where it stops. There are no quick wins. There's no cash point situations. It's about a relationship game. Don't focus on the money. Sounds ridiculous, but time and time again, charities pop in and see me on a street corner and ask me questions. It is invariably going wrong because you're focused on the budget, the money, the shortage of cash, you're panicking, you haven't got the salaries to pay next month, you haven't got the cash to pay next month's salaries. That's where you're going wrong. It's the long game here. So a lot of our experience is that charities that get into trouble because you're inconsistent. You burst your energy with a load of grant applications because you're skint, and then you stop it. Trust fundraising, my opinion, I'm afraid, is that this is not bid writing. Bid writing is a whole situation with commissioners and tenders. Grant fundraising is a relationship art, and you've got to be in it for the long game. So be consistent. Don't start and stop and start and stop and give it your attention once a year at the AGM. Plans. Fundraising is not about plans. Don't write fancy strategies. Put your strategy on the back of envelope, invariably, particularly for a small organization. That is good enough. I've seen amazing plans better than I've ever written. And I've written some amazing plans I'm proud of. It's not about that. It's about the intentional delivery and action that you do. I've seen plans written and not one thing's actually been done with that plan. So the best trustee fundraising you can do is just check in on how it's actually going. Are those fancy plans that you signed off last year actually being implemented? Where's the learning? Where's the monitoring evaluation of those plans? If you have 5 things on the back of an envelope, I'd be fully comfortable with that as a trustee, as long as those 5 things become material actions. Do you want me to stop, Carol? I could go a couple more if you want. So underlying, I think I'd say in all of this, we so focus on what we haven't got financially that we invariably do not celebrate. And as board members, you have to be championing philanthropically the energy of the organisation around successful income. when there is a win, is anyone telling you about it as a board member? Are you excited for whoever raised the money, or for the donor? Are you being asked as a board member to ring those donors occasionally? Do you ever talk to the donors? Are you indeed a donor? And I will leave it there. And whether or not you think it's enough to give your time as a donation, which indeed it may well be, because that's good enough, maybe, but do question your own activation as a donor, as a giver to the organization you're on the board of, because I have regularly been asked to go in and set the example of asking the board to give a legacy pledge. It's something to really consider and think about. Your behavior as an organizational leader, as a trustee, has to be exemplary. Are you doing the best you can do philanthropically for your organization? I hope that's a few.
That is quite a few. Thank you so much. I want to just unpack something that you touched on right at the beginning. If I were a new trustee, I think I'd be panicking now, thinking, hang on a minute, we've employed somebody and actually put money, towards investing in the money coming in. We're told you can't raise money without money. Okay, fine, we've done that. And you're still saying to me, oh, the money may still not come in. How exactly can we do something about it? How much should we do, and what's the right balance? I think, Kemi, I want to come to you as a management accountant, the person who's usually responsible for the money. How do trustees strike the balance, between making sure that they're effectively monitoring the money coming in, especially if they've invested in fundraising, and, not meddling too much in operations?
Yep, it's a good point, because it's a very hard and sometimes challenging balance to achieve. What I would suggest is, in terms of that process, it starts a lot earlier in the journey. So in some respects, it's not about at the point when the money's come in, it's what you've actually bid for, what you've told the donor or funder you're going to do, and behind the scenes what that actually means. Because quite often in both small organisations and large ones, you get sometimes a notification, yes, we've won £100,000, and then you look at the detail and it costs you £300,000 to deliver it. So a big part of it is understanding what funding it is you've got and what it's to be spent on. And then even taking a step further, as part of your fundraising strategy, what are your priorities? Is it covering your day-to-day costs? Is it covering your overheads? Is there a specific project that you want to undertake that's slightly different? So therefore, at that stage, especially if you do involve your finance team, from the outset, you are aligning what you need, so that when the money comes in, you think, great, that's going to cover the salaries, great, that's going to contribute towards the overheads. So I think in some respects, a big part of it is seeing the finance person not just as a numbers person. Most accountants, as part of their qualification, as much as it is about the numbers, we're qualified and we get tested on strategy and wider implications, because we know that finance is the lifeblood of the business, but to understand that, we need to understand the business. So I would encourage trustees and organisations to lean into their finance teams, and don't be afraid or think that because they're finance, that's all that they can work on. And if you get that rapport and explain to your finance colleagues what it is you want, then by the time it gets to the money coming into the bank, you have a much better idea of what's happening.
You're muted, Carol.
Yes, I just realized. Thank you so much, Kemi. That's really helpful. Alison, I want to come to you, because I feel like you might want to respond to a few other things that Emma said.
Yes, I think just to add, really,
yes,
to what Emma was saying, I think some of the misconceptions around fundraising, and there are a lot, are that there's three that sort of have come to mind for me. One is that it's easy, because we all believe that we work for good causes, and therefore, if you ask, you should get money, because it's a really good cause. So I think that's the first, is that it's easy and that's all you have to do. The second, I think, is quite common, that fundraisers don't work hard enough. And if they only worked harder, we'd be getting more money. And the third is that fundraisers don't think about risk. I think trustees, it is the job of trustees to manage risk for the organisation. But I think sometimes there's an idea that fundraisers haven't considered risk. And I think that can be quite dangerous, coupled with sort of misconceptions, coupled with a lack of understanding. So, the converse of the misconceptions, what is needed to successfully fundraise? What's the toolkit? What do you need at your disposal? What are the different fundraising methods? What goes into each in terms of the evidence base, in terms of the research that's needed, in terms of the kind of people that you're talking to. And then I think there's also that sort of the final thing in terms of lack of understanding and misconception is it's almost like if you imagine some scales, sort of a balance, then there's the time and the effort and the cost of fundraising plus reputational risk, balancing that versus the income that will come in. And this is what fundraisers have to do every day. And I think trustees having an understanding of that and all the things that go into making the ask of somebody, I think the closer that we can be to that thinking, the more helpful we can be in terms of fundraising.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just picking up on a comment from Anna Driver, who's just, really, I think highlighted the fact that you made the point that fundraising is not about quick wins, but it takes time and effort to build relationships. That's key, and you need the support of trustees to recognize that. However, we all know that we're not on an endless time. So what would be, valid expectations? What kind of return on investment would be reasonable, from trustees' point of view, having invested in fundraising? Laura, I wonder if you'd like to pick up on that.
I think that's a very, very hard situation to quantify, and it really depends on the type of fundraising that you're doing, I'd say, you know what I mean? Because I think just speaking from, there's just so many different avenues to go. And I think you can look at the low hanging fruit, right? Like one of the things we did recently was install, we have culture night here in Ireland, across the entire island, and we did not have a tap. So we didn't have a tap to donate, right? And we already were registered with Sum Up. So we decided to install those, and we spent, 200 euros on that to get that executed in time to just, so we knew it was a very small amount of time, a small amount of money, and we knew we were going to have hundreds of people coming in the doors between that and another campaign going on in December. But then if it's something like building out your corporate pitch book, getting the actual time and the money and the effort and the people, the bodies behind it to do it right, to prospect a list, to go in, that's a larger initiative. And you have to think about, are focusing on online donations, is that more efficient for us? So I just think it's really dependent on the organization and what they have for bandwidth in terms of staffing, what they've done in the past, what they want to do in the future, and where their financials are. But it's really like looking at the time analysis, because as everybody knows, charities and not-for-profits are completely understaffed for the most part, and as a result, it's actually those hours you have to quantify them, and what else could they be doing, and what else could they be doing more efficiently to bring money in the door.
Thank you. I do know how that there are some fundraisers and some types of fundraising bring in higher amounts. The return on investment is better if they're successful. So it's probably worth also keeping an eye on that, whether it's a trust fundraiser or somebody who's responsible for community fundraising, which is really a slow burn, if you like, and major donor fundraising, which can take a longer time. Okay, thank you. Good point. I want to pick up on a question that's in the chat, and I want to come to you, Emma, for this. I think the question is, do you see trustees Do you see trustees being asked to donate to their charity each year and help recruit major donors from their networks? I mean, is that something that you would champion, particularly, you know, as this expectation is really, I think, is normal in America? So yeah, what do you...
Yeah, I've just jumped on and actually answered. I will. I'm mindful. I'm not actually the speediest at answering things in the chat, but I'm sure Penny will boss us about if we're not getting to them. But yeah, there's quite a few people have asked about this question. A couple of things. I mean, again, sometimes I do speak with my view, and I'm always open to a good row because that's like how we improve, right? If we sometimes disagree. But I mean, I would say this. Yeah, I think major donors, high net worth, definitely Richard Branson. You know, how many charities can he possibly give to, and how many times can he be recommended to you as a fundraiser to, oh, have you thought about going to Richard Branson? So I think the reality is high net worth individuals, we don't all know rich people. In fact, most of us don't know any rich people. And if you work in the charity sector, you're very unlikely to know anyone rich. So that's the reality. I often speak to boards about fundraising fear, however. So that's the sort of polar opposite reality. To expect your board to know rich people, it's rare, right? But should we all be fundraising advocates and think about us, our personal stakeholders, people we know, people who would care like we would care? Now, okay, so I have to be careful when I walk in the room. Oh God, Charity Emma's here. You know, what's she going to ask us to do? But, you know, I have no shame in that because I totally believe in the joy of the work we all do as a sector. And so I don't see fundraising as a painful art. It's a joy to bring the cause that we love and care about as a board member into the hearts and souls of the people we know as individuals. Now, that's a slightly different behavior. I'm not asking everyone to donate and pull out, you know, a six-figure check. It's not about that. So boards that expect or charities where there's the whole high net worth stuff, you're lucky if you can access them. You're lucky if you're in a large charity, I would say, probably normally a brand situation where those networks are happening. But it is rare and far between. Fear, however, as board members does need to be overcome. And I often speak on this topic, and I'm happy to come in and talk to your boards about fear of fundraising, because that is often where that issue comes up more than anything. People think you're going to, you know, ethically, I think somebody asked the question about, is it ethical? I don't think it's ethical to join a board for 5 years, bring all your high net worth friends and then move to the next cause and then do. I don't think that's particularly ethical either. I think it's about the work, the power of the work. And that is where we should be as charities and trustees, speaking with pride, with focus on impact, with focus on stories. So this is a longer topic, but certainly, you know, these people aren't sitting around like cherries on a tree ready to be picked. It's not about that. It's the long game. And it's about love for the work and belief in the causes that matters more. I don't know if I've answered the questions. I've got quite an emotional issue, this one. But I definitely meet a lot of fear amongst board members who are worried. I can't ask. I daren't ask. I don't know how to ask. And I think we all use that word too much, ask. It's not about asking. Let the joy of the true belief in your causes speak volumes, because if you genuinely believe your organization makes a change in the world, then that's fundraising there.
Thank you. I agree. This is quite an emotional topic, and yeah, the culture that we operate in also makes it harder, doesn't it? I do have to say, however, if you don't ask, you don't get. That's just life. My team are also, when they join the organization, I can just tell you from experience, most people aren't used to asking. And so what we do is we write business development into every single person's role. You know, we're not going to be here if you don't partake of that. So I think it's also worth being explicit to board members before they join. This is what we expect from everyone, and then make it easy. We hold days where we give people tips and help them. I also say to people, before you ask, you were at zero. Whatever happens afterwards, you only have one way to go, up. No one's going to take anything from you, but they could give you. So that may or may not be helpful. Kemi, I do want to talk about or pick up on the subject to do with reserves, because You could have too little or too much. How do you straddle that, particularly, because when you go to funders, either way, it could make a difference to whether or not you get the money. Having too little is a problem. Having too much is a problem. So as a management accountant, what would you say to trustees?
Thanks, Carol. What I would say here is, again, as much as we in the finance world can be labelled as a numbers people, the numbers should also tell a story. So with your reserves policy, the key factor is how much do you need to keep as an organisation if the worst were to happen? And they are the difficult things around redundancy, closing the office, any unforeseen costs, any costs associated with leaving contracts early. So that needs to be and should be calculated. But I've also seen comments around cash flow and other matters. And when it comes to looking at your final accounts, they should give a picture, as would your management accounts during the year, because it may be that you have a high cash balance. You might be a grant giving organisation, so you've got a lot of inflow and outflow. So you need a high cash commitment. So again, I'm all about the story and the journey. So when you're creating the numbers, sometimes inadvertently we see the annual accounts as a kind of starting point for discussion, when in actual fact, the build up to those accounts should paint a picture that is reflective of the organisation. And if it doesn't, then it almost means that there's kind of something not quite right in terms of your strategy aligning with your numbers, because the two should go hand in hand. So for me personally, I think as long as you're clear in terms of the nature of that reserve policy and it's being reviewed on a regular basis, that will be adequate. There will be sadly some funders who will just decide not to fund, and that's just the same for anything, because others have said you can have a great pitch, it could be perfectly aligned in your view, and it just might not get funded. And it may be that that funder doesn't understand or appreciate the nuances, or they've been burnt in the past and they're just hesitant. So you just unfortunately get the consequence of that. But I would say that irrespective of the size of the charity and the number of trustees, as much as it's about preparing the accounts, do those make sense in terms of cash flow, how much you're carrying reserves for that rainy day? Does that all kind of make sense? And if it doesn't, you need to ensure that that story makes sense. So therefore, when you're getting questioned about your reserve policy, you have that answer straight away.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I also want to push you a little bit, because I've got a question around how you demonstrate financial sustainability. And can I expand that to include how do you actually begin to build reserves? Because let's face it, it is something that most charities just don't know. If the money isn't coming in, or it's coming in and we have to spend it, what can we do?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, particularly in this climate. So I don't have any sort of easy or quick answers, unfortunately. In reality, a big part of the fundraising, again, goes back to what you're asking for and what it's going to cover. I think one of the issues I'm sure a lot of trustees and charities has resonate with is that it's very difficult to fund overheads, and that's like a key issue. But a big part of that, again, going to Emma's point, is around the storytelling. So there's a difference between asking an organisation to fund 25% overheads as opposed to saying we want to fund this particular activity. Within that activity, there will be overheads, there will be staff costs. You're not lying, or you're not misinforming anybody. A big part of it is how you're packaging these costs. And ideally, because of that, what you can then do, that's the difference between some charities in terms of their success and not being as good. Some people think, oh, I can't get overheads. And then the charity next door thinks, well, I'm doing something similar and I can do that. So the packaging in terms of what you want to demonstrate to the prospective funder is key, and making sure that aligns with that particular funder, because some funders will say, okay, we're not funding overheads, or give me a breakdown to every half penny in terms of what's included, and they're saying, no, not doing that. So that will happen. But again, if you're able to package your offering into activity, externally, and then internally, in terms of your costing, that's actually based on what items cost, what your running costs are. That usually is like a good starting point to start to build up those reserves.
Thank you so much. There's so much conversation happening around reserves. I think that's really hit a nerve. And Harjit has very thankfully given us guidance. And I really like that. It's not enough to say just 3 months. You really, like Kemi said, it needs to be really specific, like what exactly are you spending it on. So a policy is great. And you can look at NCVO guidance. On that note, though, I want to jump to the other side because, if you don't have enough reserves, the challenge is clear. But what about if you have too much as perceived by, the funders that you're going to? What can a charity do in that situation? Alison, I don't know if you want to speak to that. Having worked for large ones who often have a lot of reserves.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, it's something that I have had, shall we say, robust conversations with boards and executive teams about, because quite often trustees are, naturally risk averse. Part of our job in terms of governance is making sure that we are doing the right thing for the charity in terms of long-term sustainability. But what can happen is that people get very excited about having the money in the bank and investing it. And what I always have to go back and say is that's not our money. That's the donors' money. The donors gave us that money to do good stuff with. It shouldn't just be sitting in a bank, and it shouldn't be, being invested in fossil fuels and those sorts of things, a whole different area. But in terms of reserves, you only need enough to sustain you should the worst happen. But we have just been through, people say the reserves are for a rainy day. We have just been through the rainiest of days with the pandemic. If that wasn't a time to use your reserves. Now, I've worked for a very large household name charity who came out of the pandemic with greater reserves than they went in. And for me, my personal view was that ethically, that's just not acceptable when there is desperate need out there. So I think we have to be really clear about who gave us the money and what is our job in terms of looking after that money on behalf of those donors. Have lent it to us for us to do something.
Thank you.
We have to remember that. It has to be front of mind. It's not the bank's money.
Can I just jump in just with a quick comment about, I completely agree with you, Alison, and I think that a lot of companies that you could be working with, corporates or donors, would understand that too, that money is supposed to be used, right? That's what it's for. But I would say that your governance story and your governance credentials should be hand in hand if you're talking to potential high net worth donors or corporate sponsors, because I know that's the financials. Yes, I want to make sure everything is sound, but I'm more concerned actually with the governance perspective, that everything is on board, that everything's been filed properly, that they're registered, that there's no scandals, that there's nothing pending, because high net worth individuals and corporations do not want to be tied to any of that, but they will understand operating cost models, because that's just the nature of sort of high net worth individuals and corporate partners. So I do think that not to overlook like the governance story that you're telling these partners, and that you can show how strong you are on the governance side, not just the financial side.
Thank you. That's really helpful. This topic is is one really that exercises my mind. I always wonder how anyone can have too much money in the bank. unless, of course, it's an endowment that's funding other stuff. I mean, there are always exceptions to the rule, but it just begs the question, do you not have ambitious enough targets, or do you not have an exit strategy? Are you planning to be a charity forever? Do you anticipate that the problem that you're solving will forever be there because you're not doing good enough? So yeah, how on earth do we justify that? Emma, you're welcome to just have the final say on this before we dive straight into creative and innovative strategies across the board for for trustees, please.
The question being, should we be there forever, and are we ever going to have enough money? Is that the question, Carol? Is that what you're asking? Sorry,
you can tackle any angle of the question around reserves.
Reserves, yeah. I work, as you know, with most of our clients are under £2 million and under. Some of them are really tiny. Two of our clients at the moment have got considerable reserve. One is to build a domestic abuse property, house, home, refuge. Feels a very justifiable reason to have that reserve. It's very restricted and tangible. Another has not broken even, and it's had a deficit budget for probably about 3 or 4 years. It received a legacy. It's holding it in reserve to use it every year until its fundraising becomes sustainable, to answer that funny question in the chat, which is a very good question. It's a very challenging question about sustainability. So the conundrum there is they exclude a lot of the grant requirements for grant makers because they've got this pot, but they're using the pot because they're not breaking even. This is a charity, significantly, once again, it's under £1 million, this charity. So these are the sorts of conundrums. Each charity has its own particular recipe, which is why I think as a panel, we would all say there's so many different ways to answer this. What's the perfect reserve? There is not an answer to that, which is the beautiful and quirky nature of charities in and of themselves. I think as a board, you've got to ask yourself responsibly, are we doing everything we can responsibly at this point in time to solve the need that we were established for? That's my very grey politician's answer to that question, Carol, because I feel very strongly, I meet a lot of charities and I love them all for their various idiosyncrasies. But I invariably, those of you who are on the call know that I lean in very closely and ask most trustees, are you doing a good enough job? How do you know you're doing a good job? Are you seeing yourselves from the outside in enough to question whether you should be spending more on this? So sometimes I get on a call and someone says, why should I ask £8,000 for Awards for All? Because I know there's money sitting in the bank, so I could just spend that. So that's the conundrum, isn't it? That do you just spend willy-nilly, or do you raise money at the same time? And because you were trying to play the long game and you want to be there for the future, you keep asking. So, but if you're building too much up, I think we owe ourselves the responsibility to the people we serve and the society we're trying to serve to make sure you're spending a reasonable amount and you're not accruing. There are actually a surprising number of charities out there accruing significant pots, and no one's really, quite a few of them I know getting away with it. So that's not great, right? I think we could probably all say that.
Thank you. That's a really good question to ask if you're a trustee. Are we doing everything we can right now for our service users, for those we're serving? It's a great question. And that's the responsibility of all trustees. Every trustee should feel free and should be able to ask that question and do what they can. On that note, I'd like to begin to round this session up. It's been really great. The conversations have been wonderful. But just before we go, I'd love to come to the panel and ask them, whether they have any suggestions and tips for innovative and creative fundraising strategies that have proven successful for nonprofits, simply because trustees are responsible for setting strategy. This is really important. And yeah, any guidance, I'm sure the trustees on this call would really appreciate that. Yeah, Laura, can I come to you first, please?
Sure. And I'm going to talk from just the corporate partnership perspective, but I would say don't overlook the power of marketing. And I know I say this as a marketer who does a lot of work in the charity sector, but think about how you're marketing your charity, your organization. Think about what's in it for the potential corporate partner. Make sure you know and understand that potential partner and why you think they're a good fit for you. And maybe think about the fact that even though you're talking to a corporate person, you might have someone on the other end, and you probably do have the person on the other end who's very passionate about working with charities and not-for-profits. So you do have somebody who's going to have lend a gentle ear to you. So they want you to be successful. They want your organization to be successful, and they're taking the call with you because they're interested in the first place. So just think about how you can really become a beneficial partner to them and help them with employee engagement, potentially help them with attraction of new employees, help them with positive brand recognition. So just think about what that looks like to your organization when you're going out there to market.
Thank you, Laura. Alison, would you like to share some?
Yes, I was thinking about this. I think one of them, quite often, trustees focus on the minutiae of active fundraising campaigns because they want to feel like they're helping. So you get, there's an example at a very large household name charity right now where the chair of the trustees is getting involved in fundraising methodology, which is really not helpful at all. And is actually risking significant income, millions of pounds worth of income, by sort of meddling in the discipline itself. Trustees do that for their own reasons, because they want to feel like they're helping and doing the right thing and being risk averse. The other side of that is actually the most useful thing that I think trustees can do is, as I mentioned before, understand the numbers, understand where the money is coming from, understand the methods and what goes into each of those methods, and then have at their disposal the facts and stats, the case for support, the elevator pitch, and be prepared to take opportunities. And don't just think about money, think about pro bono support, think about networks, think about people. It's not just cash, it's resources in the widest sense. So I think if we equip trustees, and I've done some work with trustee boards on this, we equip them with all the tools they need, then boards feel really confident and comfortable in being able to spot opportunities and think creatively about what might help their organisation.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Kemi, can I come to you next, and then we'll round up with Emma?
Yep, sure. I'd like to pick up on Alison's point about pro bono. I think it's really important not to underestimate the value of any voluntary and sort of non-finance support, which you can equate a number to. I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was working for a UK-wide charity, we had a high number of volunteers, and there was actually a nationally recognised tool where you could convert the amount of hours that volunteers worked, different types of volunteers, into a cost, and that proved really effective for one of our fundraising applications. Similarly, there was another one where the same charity worked with a fire service, because it just happened that because in general people trust the fire service, they were able to go into homes of people who were marginalised or at risk. So again, we was able to convert that into a cost, and one of the points of feedback that came back as to why the application was successful was because we were able to demonstrate that we've got this pot of equivalent in-kind funding, and ultimately what we did is turn the cost of that, we sort of put a cost against that resource. But even if you've got a fellow trustee or a friend who can lend you a room for free, you can then see what the market rate of that room is, and again you're just completely changing the narrative to say we're asking for X amount, we've got the equivalent of this because we've got this room for hire, we've got this catering that's for free but would cost the equivalent of that. So again, it does go back to the storytelling and the packaging, but don't underestimate the power of that sort of so-called free resource.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Emma?
I couldn't agree more with Kemi. And just to give us some live examples of that, if you think about the charity Fair Share, it was founded based on the fact that at a crisis, we got far too much in terms of gifts in food at Christmas. It got turned into a goal to reduce biodiversity, improve biodiversity and improve biodegradable waste and to recycle it, feed homeless people at the same time. And 25 years later, you've got the charity Fair Share now doing its thing. So, you know, similarly, crisis itself in those days, it was a long while ago I worked there, but it couldn't have run Christmas without volunteer capacity at volume as well, you know, many thousands of volunteers. So those organizations, if you look at the legacy which that's procured, I mean, if anyone's ever heard me talk about corporate partnerships, I always start with the smallest, lowest hanging fruit, which is the gift in time, the gifts in kind. It turned into multiple years of donations, but the relationship the crisis had with the Financial Times simply came from volunteers in the post room not wanting the business to send out Christmas cards anymore. And that led to millions of pounds worth of donations. So if you are a small organization, you're looking for inspiration, look at some of the larger charities and look at their early origins. And I agree entirely with what Kemi's just said. Gifts in kind, gifts in time, lots of big charities today exist because they started on those principles. So, but just to finish off on your ultimate question, Carol, which is quick wins, innovation, something to diversify income, right? Obviously, again, I could spend our day on this topic, but I'm going to say two things. As a board member, if these things aren't happening, just check this. Number one, it's not innovative, but is your organisation asking for legacies? Is it asking for gifts in wills? You know, it's the greatest growing source of income in the UK at the moment. It won't last forever. The baby boomer population, your organisations can ask for legacies, gifts in wills. It's not about death. It's not about dying. It's about future, and it's about hope and joy. So don't be afraid of it. And secondly, collaborations. Picking up on Laura's point about marketing yourselves, if you are, again, I will bang on about small organizations, but it applies to big ones as well. Working together, working in collaboration, find that organization that fits and has a synergy with your organization, and think about messaging together to gain data, to gain opt-ins, to grow your portfolio of where you're engaging. Tiny little example, Fight Bladder Cancer, a very, very small charity that I was very, very close to and still am, very fond of. Tiny organization, 20,000 people a year diagnosed with bladder cancer, not suitably being funded or focused on by some of the larger cancer charities at this point in time, still worryingly. Beautiful partnership with the union, GMB, where you have health and safety risks at work, which lead to bladder cancer. 600,000 people receive the Risk magazine. I think it's called something like, it's not Health and Safety Today or something really boring, but a perfect way to reach more people, right? So these things don't need to be complicated or particularly innovative, but gain engagement, gain interaction by working in partnership.
Thank you so much, Emma. I mean, that's been brilliant. I wish we had more time. We don't, but that was a really good note to end on. I mean, alone we're one drop, together we're a mighty ocean. In closing, I want to express my gratitude to our brilliant panelists for sharing their valuable insights and experiences. I hope that our discussion has provided you with a clearer understanding of the potential fundraising pitfalls, but more importantly, tools and strategies to avoid them. I know that fundraising can be daunting and it can be a challenging task, but it's also a powerful means to achieve your organization's mission and create a lasting impact. And as trustees, your role is pivotal in this endeavor. So remember that the journey to a successful fundraising is a learning process. The mistakes we make along the way can be some of our most valuable lessons. So I want to encourage you all to embrace the opportunity to grow, to adapt, to innovate in your fundraising efforts. Be open to learning from your missteps, but also celebrate your successes, because ultimately the passion and dedication you bring to your roles as trustees can be a driving force in ensuring the sustainability and success of the organizations that you serve. Thank you for being part part of this enlightening discussion. I wish you all the best in your endeavors. The panelists, please drop your contact details in the chat. And I hope that you all go away and help to secure the resources that will enable your organizations to thrive and continue to be world changers who make a positive difference in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol, Alison, Kemi, Laura, and Emma. That was amazing. I agree with all the comments in the chat. That was so useful. I've posted in the chat the evaluation form. We'd love to hear what you thought of this session. It will also pop up when you come off the Zoom. We've got a networking session tonight, as I mentioned earlier, and there's a link there in the chat to that networking session. You just need to copy that out of Zoom if you'd like to come. It's at 7:30 till 8:15 on Zoom tonight. Loads of stuff that we could talk about there, isn't there? If you're a weekly pass holder, that link will also be in the links that you got from Eventbrite this morning for today's sessions. Somebody's asked about the recording. Yes, if you've booked this as a separate event, you'll get the recording this afternoon. If you're a weekly pass holder, it'll be included in all of the week's recording at the end of the day. On that, if you've bought a ticket to this event and you now want to convert a weekly pass, because now you can see what ace panel debates we've got going on, you can still convert, and there's a code there to get you the £5 back from this ticket price off your weekly pass, which is £25. And that pass, as well as access to the events for today and tomorrow, it gets you all of the recordings for the week that have gone as well. And just a plug for getting on board. So, there's been other useful organisations mentioned here as well today. So please do remember that we have a big splash during Trustees Week, but getting on board is here all year long. So please do have a look at what we provide, including a free trustee learning programme, which is year round. So thank you all so much for coming, and I hope to see you at festival sessions later today and tomorrow. Thanks so very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Nice
Take
to
care.
meet
Good to see you. Thank you, Penny.
Cheers.